Scott is a San Francisco two-time Grammy-nominated musician who goes by Tycho. What you might not know is he got his start as a designer and still considers his work an audio-visual experiment. Scott's work caught our eye because he pioneered a collaborative approach to album cover art with his 2019 single, Easy. He created a template image and then opened it up to his fans to customize and remix, and their art then formed the basis of the Spotify page. Scott will be joined by Khoe for an interesting conversation about community collaboration and creative tools. Khoe, one of our keynote speakers this afternoon and one of my personal mentors, is an interdisciplinary artist and designer who is most recently VP of Design at Khan Academy. She's also a DJ and re-becoming a musician, so we thought it'd be really fun to get them together to share their perspectives. Please join me in welcoming Scott and Khoe.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. You guys.
All right. Are we on?
Check,
Yes?
Check. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi. So I told Scott a little bit earlier when we were chatting that I'm going to tell him how I heard of him, which was back in, I want to say it was around 2008. I actually heard about you from the founding designer of Square, Robert Anderson.
Oh, wow.
At that time. Loved your design as ISO50 and your music. And it actually inspired us, and this is kind of embarrassing to admit, so I'll admit it. It inspired us to make some music. I think he actually wound up getting one track into some indie movie somewhere as a result.
Nice.
So,
That's awesome.
And I think back then, one of the things that really struck me about it was like, how do you get to do this? How do you get to be a musician and a designer? Like, how did you get to wind up going full-time into music as that journey? So I was curious to hear a little bit more about that. Like, how did you juggle both those things?
Yeah, it was definitely juggling for a long time, and it was definitely kind of considering yourself a amateur musician and a professional designer. You know, I was a designer for probably like 10 years professionally while I was trying to get the music thing off the ground. But you know, there was so much overlap between those two, kind of the learning process and the journey to find your way to both of those, that I feel like I kind of was training for each in parallel.
So one thing that you mentioned I thought was really interesting is that you didn't study design. You weren't trained as a designer. So can you say a little bit more about that journey?
Yeah, it made me kind of feel like an outsider or like an imposter for a long time, because it's like I don't really know this stuff, and these people have like learned these things. But I think there's a beauty to finding your way to something and understanding it through the lens of your own experience and not having too much coaching. But then I feel like there are points where I feel like I had to work way harder to get to overcome some of the hurdles, especially as a designer, because I feel like visual communication there's a lot of rules that kind of really help you overcome some blocks, and those were things that I had to kind of find out the hard way. So it was, that's one thing I regret, is I wish I'd gone to school for design, but the music thing, I always felt like I enjoyed just finding my way through it.
It's on your own?
Yeah.
Do you remember do you remember designing your first design, what that was like?
Yeah. I always did like art in high school and stuff. My first like computer-aided design, I went away to college. I went to USF here in the city, and in the 90s, so like computer graphics was pretty new, and like images being on the internet was really new. And we were like rebels, so we made like a zine for the college, like against anti-establishment zine, and we'd find all these like pictures of nuns holding shotguns, because it was a Jesuit it was a Jesuit school, and we'd use the computer lab printer to print them all up and put them in the stalls of all the bathrooms in the dorms. So I was really proud of myself for that one.
That's amazing. Do you still have copies?
I was actually looking, that hard drive died a long time ago, but I don't have any of the physical copies now.
Oh man, bummer. It'd be amazing to find a photo.
Yeah.
So how did you make the decision to go full-time into music after being a designer for so long? How did that all happen?
I think I'd been doing music for probably 10 years, playing shows, and it was about 2009, and I had built up all these kind of ideas. I had a record out, but it was kind of like, it had been years before, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do another one. And I was working at Adobe and like Macromedia when it turned into Adobe. And then I went on my own and did design for probably 4 years and did the blog. I had this blog called ISO50 and really focused on like visual stuff. But somewhere around 2009, I felt like I had this collection of tracks that I wanted to take on the road, but like represent in a band context. Like I had been just doing like laptop stuff till then. So like I think that was the impetus for it, is like finding this group of people where we could represent this live and like trying to find a way to translate this into the live space and have it be compelling. And that's what really got me engaged and made me want to do it for a living. Because once you start touring, you kind of that has to be your thing. So that was kind of the turning point.
Got it. So did you have to save up to do it, or how did you work that out?
Yeah, I had a few fortuitous situations. I got like I used to do a lot of t-shirt designs, and a couple companies stole the designs and then subsequently had to pay me a lot more than they would have had to pay me for the licenses. So that was kind of like the nest egg for Tycho. One of those companies just went out of business, and their whole business model was doing this, so it was kind of nice to see that. Me and my wife were walking downtown, and we looked and we saw the empty store, and I was like, yes, there we go.
You're like, sometimes karma acts fast.
But yeah, I burnt through that money, probably 2 years of funding the loss-leading tours of Tycho, and then finally, somewhere around 2014, it turned the corner, and it became something that made sense, and it was, it's been my career ever since, and I just feel really fortunate that it's working out. I'm always waiting for it not to be working out. I'm like so pessimistic about it, but it's going well now, so I'm happy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you this little quote that I love, and I think this will really resonate with the audience. By the way, I've been geeking out on this book by Questlove, Creative Quest. Love it. I don't know if you've had a chance or if you even have the time to read this thing. But the sentence is really lovely. It says, much of building your own creative identity is understanding yourself as part of a collaborative environment. And seeing your show last night, hearing about your collaborations with Zach, I really would love to know, what it's been like. How have your collaborators changed you? There's another little snippet in here that says, Prince gets credit as a singular genius. And obviously he was, but if you study him with any level of specificity, you see how important all of his creative partnerships have been. And I know that switching to live really changed your music, and obviously working with Zach and Rory has changed it a bunch. So I'd be curious to hear more specifics, the types of things that have changed as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's immeasurable, and that's exactly what started it. Is we started playing as a band, playing my music live, and then the way that they translated it and the way that they took it and opened it up, and you saw different elements come to the forefront. It just gives you a lens and a different perspective on your own work that I don't think you'd ever have otherwise. And then, so we decided, let's make the next record together, which was Awake. And I feel like for me, that was the most growth between any records. That was like the biggest change and the biggest evolution, and that was because of both of them. And their contributions to that just open it up into a whole new dimension that I really never could have imagined. And I was always into like rock, and I loved the idea of bands, and I always wanted to be in a band, but nobody asked me to be in a band because I wasn't a musician until
so you
I was
had to
20.
make one.
Yeah, so I just made my own band. And then, but yeah, that was a huge moment. When we made that record, it just all kind of clicked, and so yeah, the touring part of it is what really taught me like the collaborative process and how powerful that could be.
Mm-hmm. More recently, Saint Sinner.
Yeah.
How's that gone? That's a whole thing. So for people who don't know, this is new for you, like working with a vocalist and having a vocalist really take front and center, right? So
yeah, well, I guess so. Like 2004, when I was working on my first record, Past the Prologue, it was actually the concept. It was going to be a vocal record, and I had recorded all these vocals, but I wasn't in the right place to make it into a full-blown vocal record, because I was really into like 07 and cinematic orchestra and all that stuff. And so like that was my goal, is to do something like that. So I ended up using all those as like vocal snippets and kind of like abstract layers in the music over the years. But this was the first time I was like, okay, it's been all this time, and it's like I need to revisit this idea and make like a literal, vocal record. And so I connected with Hannah kind of like just serendipitously, and it ended up being this perfect combination, like the texture and the timbre of her voice. It just kind of flows into the music like kind of another instrument. It was a really fun experiment.
Did it change the way you created?
Yeah, for that album for sure. Yeah, because I always, I typically write these basic ideas, and then iteratively, like I always think of the process is what's going to design the final product. So it's like I'm running it through these filters and this process that I've designed in the studio, and this time, it kind of that whole middle part got pulled out, and it was like I just had these concepts, gave them to her, and she just turned them into this whole other thing. And it was like you're presented with this completely new idea. So finding a way, I think of myself as a producer, but not really, because producers can go in and take other people's ideas and understand them immediately, and like know what needs to be changed and how this could be better. And for me, that was like my first real, experience with that. Is like having to be presented with this completely new idea, and what do you do with this, and how do you make sense of it? So I really feel like I learned a ton during that process.
I'd be curious to know what there was like. Do you have like a specific thing that you're like, I didn't know about this, and then?
Yeah, I think space, creating space in your compositions, and vocals want to be the main element, and I've never thought of like, if the music is really just this kind of textured tapestry type thing, and I don't ever think of one thing. There's very seldom like a lead or something that's just cutting through the whole mix, and like this is the main event. But vocals, they kind of need to be the main event. If they're buried, it kind of doesn't. At least for what I wanted this record to be, I felt like that had to happen. So learning how to pare back and to scale back all the millions of layers going on in there was an interesting process. And by the end, I realized, what, I don't even really need that. Like that's not serving a purpose. So it taught me a lot about like, breaking down your own work and deciding what really needs to be there and what's important to most efficiently communicate whatever the idea it is that you're trying to communicate.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It's interesting because around that, you'd mentioned earlier that your design work has been becoming more and more minimal over time too.
Yeah.
Those two things happening together, or?
Yeah, I think with design, like because I was always just kind of teaching myself, I kind of like stagnated. For a long time, I didn't feel like I overcame some of the hurdles that I was trying to overcome, and I was always really into kind of the Swiss style and minimal European design, but I just felt like there was something going on there, a code that I couldn't crack. So it just took me a long time to learn about color theory and layout and design before I felt like I could approach that style and have it still be compelling. Because my old style was like throw 8,000 layers at the wall and hope that it looks cool. It's like creating these almost like paintings, which I appreciate that too. But there was a part of me that really wanted to be like a true designer. And when I think of graphic design, I think of minimalism and efficient communication.
Right. Yeah. I feel like it was funny to hear about what you like to do with those shapes, though, that you don't just leave them there, that you spend a lot of time beating them up, distressing them, and blurring them. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, so my problem I've always had with computer-generated graphics, or computer-generated anything, is I feel like it's too perfect in a way, and I think some people use that in a really effective way. In their work, I can see that they're leaning on that and they're using that as an aesthetic. But for me, I want things to feel like a photograph or like an emulsion or a transfer, like letraset stuff in films, titles and stuff. I just love that vibe. So like learning the process of how to make the edge of a digital element blend with a photograph or a raster element or textures. That was a long process of learning, and just like so. For any of the images, always just blur the edge of the text and then put a grain layer over and then do like multiply modes to get that nice edge where you get that dark, like clarity edge on there that looks like it's a transfer. So just subtle things. I used to just put tons of like paper layers and all that, and now I'm trying to be more subtle about it and have it be like you can't really pick it out, but like it affects you still. Like you're still perceiving it. You just couldn't like articulate what you're seeing.
Right. Yeah.
That's the idea, is to keep it kind of like subdued.
So speaking of all of those layers, how did you come up with the idea to involve your fan base collaboratively with Easy, and how did that whole thing go?
Well, this whole record, Weather, was all about, because I think Tycho and the instrumental music in general is all about kind of creating this space for people to, they connect with it and make it their own. It's their own journey. It's a personal journey because there's not much meaning really built in that's obvious. Like it means something to you, but it's not necessarily something that you expect everyone else to interpret that way. So I wanted this record to be all about one person's specific experience with the music, and that's what Hannah was about. Is now you're hearing these literal lyrics and the way that she's interacting with that space. So I thought I wanted the imagery to be collaborative as well, and these are the first album covers. That album cover was the first one where I used a photograph by somebody else. Nirav Patel took that. So like I wanted it to be somebody else's experience. So then we thought like, the next level of that would be to open it up to everyone else. And it was just to see all that stuff come back and to see your own kind of like the core ideas extrapolated and taken to these totally different other spaces was really, again, you learn a lot about your own work.
Did you have any surprises or favorite things that came?
That's how good it was. I was like, what the heck? I was like, why didn't? Yeah, I wish that was the one I thought of.
Did you know that? So, just those of you who design music interfaces, and obviously I got a lot of reactions when people found out we were going to be on stage together. I think a lot of designers who have to design music interfaces will use your album and your artist profile because everything just looks amazing automatically because you designed all this beautiful art, and it just, that way people don't have to put ugly placeholder art. Have you ever thought about doing something similar with the music?
Yeah, definitely. I think on a kind of small scale, having remixes by other artists is kind of like that. Like, obviously you select the artist and it's somebody that you know their work, so there's not huge surprises, but to see the way that they interpret that is always interesting. But yeah, I think the next logical step is I want to put the stems out as like a remix project just out to the public and just see what comes back. I think Little Dragon did that once and that was really inspiring, so I think that'd be cool to try. What kinds of things do you think you might learn about your own music? And I always feel like people pick up on the background, what I think of as background textures, and they bring them to the forefront, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's like compelling. That's interesting and compelling on its own, like almost as like ambient music. That's because I'm always trying to I always think there needs to be this like melodic element to like tie it together, but sometimes just like gauzy soundscapes are fun too. The Gauss showing up in absolutely everything. Do you have a favorite creative tool? And it could be anything, Minimoog, whatever it is, that you could describe what it is that you love about and how it is that it informs you. Like, do you feel like your work is super shaped by that tool in some way? I mean, yeah. I think the computer, as cliche as that is, the computer is absolutely the most important tool I have. I mean, I know it's broad because there's many tools on it, but just the idea of like being able to explore, have undo states and have non-destructive editing where you're pushing into these other spaces and then pulling back and like learning a lot about that path, but not taking it and taking another one. That's huge, and that opened everything up for my process. But yeah, I mean, I think Minimoog is probably the most inspiring instrument or device I've ever interacted with, and that kind of informed all of my music since I got it. I think I started with that on Dive, and that became kind of my sound. Do you know what it is about it that? It's just a living, breathing instrument. It was designed in the 60s, and it's analog, and it's not every time it's different, and it behaves in this really organic way where it does feel like it's changing and it's moving with you, and you form a relationship with them. They all sound different. Like you can play another one and it sounds different, totally different than yours. Whoa. Yeah, it's like a guitar, And it was also the first integrated synthesizer, or the first commercially available one. So it's like the archetype for the way that all synthesizers were made afterwards, like the way that the oscillators go into the filter section, and you have the two envelopes, one for the filter, one for the amplifier, like that. It's really interesting seeing a tool like this and realizing this guy, Bob Moog, he invented this at that time, and like this is what I think a synthesizer is, and you forget somebody was just guessing their way through this, thinking what would be the coolest way to lay all these things out, and like pitch wheels and mod wheels, like we take those things for granted, but like that was a novel concept at the time. Do you ever think about what it would be like to take something like that and apply it to design? Like what if you took all those same outputs and you attach them to, because you were playing with video, right? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like if you were to sound change all those buttons, I always wonder what it would mean to take a tool for sound and hook it into visuals and have it manipulate something like. So the Critter and Guitari makes this thing called the Organelle, which basically does just that. It's this little thing I have. It has an HDMI out, and it's like a synthesizer and a sampler. It can be anything. It's like a little, I don't know what the processor is, but it's an open-ended architecture. You can basically write your own software for it, but it has a visual component to it, so it's really cool. And they do like video synths, but I used to do, the live show used to mostly just me manipulating visuals with a program called VDMX, which is like a modular video editing effects environment, and I'd use this controller, and it was really cool. You could lay out the software any way you wanted, and you could map a controller to it, so you could basically create like a video synth, and like that was. So when I moved to Premiere, which I do most of my visuals in now, it was like a really huge learning curve because I used to just record the outputs of that thing, and it was like this very like in the moment, like performance oriented thing where you're just kind of like doing stuff on the fly, and to translate that into this very like kind of procedural process was kind of like a learning curve for me.
Did you like it, or how did you feel?
I look back at that old stuff and I go, yeah, it's dirty and it's messy and it doesn't hit always at the right time, but it's like there's way more, there's sometimes much more interesting things going on, like the accidents and all the stuff that you couldn't really kind of like think of in this clinical environment of working in front of a computer.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. In this Questlove book, he also talks about how when he first started drumming, he really wanted to sound like a machine. And then he realized that those little mistakes, all of those little things actually warm it up. They really give things like more of a human touch.
Yeah,
and it was interesting to kind of want that back. Yeah. Take a quick look here at all of the things, because I think we got a little bit left. Oh yeah, this was something that struck me. Thanks again for the show last night. There's these really beautiful moments when you'd put on a guitar, you'd walk over to Zach, and the two of you were standing in front of each other, like looking at each other and looking at each other's hands. So this is this live, in the moment collaboration going on. Can you say more about what's happening in that moment? I just found that really lovely, like just having the good vibes, the collaboration shine on stage. I think the audience picks up on the fact that you all collaborate well. Can you say more about what's happening?
Yeah, I think, there's, I don't know how to explain it. It's like this really deep connection that you have with somebody when you make music together, when you're just in a room and like you're speaking to each other in this other language, and it's really powerful. Like I'm not a very great, I don't consider myself a great communicator, or like I don't relate with people as well as I would like to in normal life all the time. So like music is my way of like truly connecting with somebody and like, communicating these really like deeply held ideas without saying anything. So like, Zach was the first person I ever met that like kind of we vibed in that way, because it doesn't always work with everybody. So like, on stage you have all these people in front of you, and it's kind of there's a lot of pressure, and I don't always deal well with that either. So like sometimes you get out of the performance and you're just thinking about the notes and you're just thinking about don't screw up. But when you walk over there, it's almost, and you're just looking at each other and you're close to the other guys, like it's like you feel like you're back in the studio and you're just in that moment. So like that's always like a moment you can recenter on stage and be like, we're making music. This isn't about like doing everything perfect. It's just like relax and act like you're back in the studio. So that always recenters everything.
Oh, that's interesting. I felt like you could feel that.
That's good. I'm glad that translated.
Yeah, it was really lovely. So is there anything that you're trying to accomplish now that you're like, I can't do that yet? There's this thing that I have in my head that I really want to be able to do, and I just don't feel like I'm there yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that I can really, articulate. Yes, it's a specific thing, but there's also just this overall, you kind of have this, I don't know, I've just always like thought of it as this idea that's up there, and you can't really describe it or make it out, but it like shows parts of itself to you over time, and you hope that each album's chipping away at it, and like the next one's going to be the one that brings it all together. But I don't know. Right now, I'm just focused on like kind of returning to electronic music and my roots, and like trying to, I feel like when I started out, I was really into drum and bass in like '90s. That the sound design around that sound of like Bristol drum and bass, Ronnie Size and Photech and all that.
Oh yeah, just real quick for people in the audience, we figured out just before coming on stage, we've kind of gone through similar phases. We've had like kind of a metal phase, right?
Yeah.
And then a drum and bass phase. So y'all kind of get how old we are. Ronnie Size. Anyone heard of Ronnie Size?
Yeah.
Anyone else saw him live during Represent?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So you were saying.
But yeah, like when I was getting, that was the vector for me, is like technology samplers. I was like, I can understand those things, because I never played an instrument till I was about 20, and I heard Logical Progression by LTJ Bookham. And actually, Photech Pharaoh was the song that really like clicked, and I just I could never make those sounds. It took me forever to even understand how he did them. So I'm trying to come back now with everything that I've learned and like start to make music like that, or like make like a little EP of drum and bass stuff.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh man, it's funny because I feel like people are talking about drum and bass again.
It's
I feel
weird.
Like
I've
we went through this
that.
phase and then it was gone, and now people are like drum and bass and trip hop all over again.
Yeah, and luckily they're paying attention to the good part of drum and bass, not the one that like early 2000s it got too intense and like heavy. Like all that atmospheric cool stuff, like in the mid '90s, that was the sweet spot for me. For me, at least. I don't know. That other stuff was cool in a way, but yeah, it was too heavy.
Yeah, it got really intense after a while.
Yeah, drill and bass and all that stuff, all the weird variants.
But we were also laughing a little bit about how, especially when you were a kid, if you were into metal, then you can kind of you can take the kid away from the metal, but you can't get the metal out of the kid. So like, do you feel like some of those, like, does that stuff still come through? Do you feel like
yeah, and I mean, that's another thing I want to do. I really want to, like, Epoch, I feel like was like trying to like express that part of my history, and what inspires me is like kind of bring the rock elements into it. So I think one of the next records will definitely be like a heavier, more kind of like guitar-driven, logical extreme of that. Wherever that record was headed, this will be the destination.
Do you think we'll ever get to hear you sing on a record?
Eventually I'll put something out like that. I have some songs, but I mean, it's mostly like, you know, vague ambient space, massive reverb, so you can't really tell it's vocals. yeah, hiding behind effects stuff, so no. Yeah, you're not gonna hear me with an acoustic guitar doing a folk unplugged set anytime soon.
That's amazing. Is there anything you feel that I didn't ask that you were like excited to talk about?
No, I mean, that feels like it covered a lot of stuff. I think that, the collaborative process, I think that's just something that I've come to later in my career. I'm a pretty introverted person, so like that was never something that really occurred to me, and it took a long time to learn how to work with other people, and it took a lot, you know, it's really hard to overcome kind of the lack of tools that there are in the world for those things, and so like finding my way through that process, and you know, the ups and downs, and finding the positives of it it's been amazing. So it's like to see something like this, you know, everybody coming together for something like this, it's really inspiring.
Okay, last question, I think. How are we doing for time? If you had to pick between a triangle, a circle, a trapezoid, and a hexagon, and you could only pick one, which one would you stick with?
A circle, of course, yes. Circle's the best. Circle's the best, perfect, a perfect circle.
I love the way that all of that, you've got such strong branding elements, and then seeing them come to life via video on stage, that stuff was powerful.
Yeah, like that. I mean, I lean on the circle a lot. I keep coming back to that. The triangle's like this really powerful, edgy thing. Like it feels like dark or something, like crystal energy in there or something. So that's like the dark arts when you bring that in. But then the circle's like, the sun, it's nice, happy, round.
Is it the principle that you have of wanting to be able to have people project themselves into what's, you know, leaving enough room for the person, which I really love, to see what they want or to hear what they want? Does that have another story behind it? Does that come from something in your life or something personal, or is it?
Yeah, so when I first came here, I moved here in 1995 to go to school, and we were in the computer lab, and we had like access to all these batteries and speakers, so we built this backpack with these big speakers on them, and we walk up into the Twin Peaks like hills in the middle of the night where it was like all foggy and like you know, it's like a rainforest up there at night, and we played like logical progression or blast, whatever, you know, some like trippy drum and bass stuff, and we just like wander around in those woods, and like those are like the most formative experiences of connecting an experience to music, you know, connecting music to like what you were doing, and I always smell, you know, the eucalyptus and like taste the, you know, have the dew on your skin and all that stuff. Like that will always be this visceral experience that I have when I listen to that music, and that's always what I've tried to do with my work, is like create something that someone can take and attach to an experience and bring back all those senses every time you hear that music, no matter where you are.
Wow. Damn, that makes me think around the time that you were doing that, I think I was driving around the Northwest with the music on full blast, the heat all the way up, the windows down. Like,
that's awesome.
Same
that
thing, like moisture.
yeah, that's awesome.
That's amazing. Are we at time? We're at time. Thank you so much. It's been really fun chatting.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you guys.